Welcome to another episode of Transparency Talks. I'll tell you, I've been having a great time talking to many of the different leaders and people, some in our agency, some outside of our agency. And today we have a very special guest, Damon West. You know, you're an author, you're a speaker. I see you traveling all over the country, speaking to very powerful groups, sports teams, corporations, and things like that. Thanks for being here today. Appreciate you coming on and doing this podcast. So, who is Damon West?
Well, Debbie Smith, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I am honored to be in this building, and we'll hear from the conversation just how incredible it is to be in a room like this with you today, especially with you. You hit the nail on the head. I wear a lot of different hats. One of them is I'm a speaker. I go around the world sharing my story and the message of the coffee bean. The coffee bean is basically the allegory about life, that life is a pot of boiling water. You have three choices. You can be like a carrot that goes in hard but becomes softened by the water, an egg that becomes hardened on the inside by the water, like a hard-boiled egg. Your heart can become hardened. Or you could be like a coffee bean that changes the pot of boiling water into a pot of coffee. And the coffee bean's about being the change agent, right? The power is inside the coffee bean to change the water around the coffee. It's one of the coolest allegories I've ever heard. And that's when I go around sharing that message. I do this as a writer. I do it as a speaker. Like you said, sports teams, corporations, and just all kinds of neat rooms I get to go into now. I was a professor for 3 years of criminal justice. I got a master's in criminal justice, and for 3 years I've held a class at University of Houston called Prisons in America. And so there's a lot of stuff in my life that goes around the world of corrections, but my main thing is I want to go out there and bring people hope. I want to show them that what the possibilities are in life, because that's the one thing every human being has to have, Director Smith. They got to have hope.
So I know that you speak in prisons. You speak at, top sporting events, the corporate events and things. Tell me one of the most interesting ones, or maybe the most impactful ones, events that you've spoken at.
I would tell people that people ask me the sports stuff, right? Around all these championship coaches and championship teams. What's my favorite team? And I had to go back to Clemson, man. Clemson, Dabo Swinney and I become really close friends at Clemson, and Dabo was really the first coach to bring me in and share the message of the coffee bean, and Dabo really gravitated towards it. And Dabo was the guy that connected me to all the sports world out there. Nick Saban, Kirby Smart, Lincoln Riley. These guys started bringing me in. He introduced me to a guy named John Gordon, and John Gordon is one of the biggest speakers and authors in America. And it's through that relationship, because relationships are everything. That's one of the things we'll talk about today. Relationships are everything. And those relationships have allowed me to go in some of the most amazing places. Domestically, some of the places I like going into, prisons are always really high on my list of places to go into. And I don't get paid anything to go into a prison, but you get paid in a different way. And internationally, one of the coolest things I've ever got to do, I got to speak to the House of Lords in London. And just to know that I got to go to London in the first place to do this and share the message of the coffee bean over there, they wanted to hear what we were doing with criminal justice over here in America. My foundation does a lot of stuff with children incarcerated inmates, and they were very interested in that. So it's great to go share the coffee bean message across the pond. The book, The Coffee Bean, that I wrote is in every language in the world. So it's like, it's a message that's spreading all over the world. And opportunities come up more and more to go in these different places.
I heard about you actually through one of our wardens. Okay, so I was touring, I think it was my first week here, and one of the wardens talked about it was getting you in. It was difficult. They tried to, and then they got you in. And what was interesting, the very next day, I got a call from Brian Collier, the head of Texas Department of Corrections, good friend of mine. And he goes, "Hey, Josh," this was Saturday morning. The very next morning after this warden mentioned it to me, he said, "Hey, I need to tell you about this guy, Damon West." And he said, "You need him in your prisons. You gotta talk to this guy." And then you and I connected very quickly after. And then since you were able to go into a prison of ours, and a lot of people don't know, you were the one that helped bring Steve Harvey into our prison system there in Atlanta. And a lot of people all across the country, why Atlanta? And they were, Facebook and the comments are great here. You get to see all kinds of.
I've read some of the comments that are asking, how much did you pay Steve Harvey? Sam did it for free.
They opine, "Hey, you should pay in there, you should put money here." Some just gonna be negative no matter what, but
Right.
I tell you, you did it, and you spoke that day as well. Very powerful story. I was very impressed just to see your passion, and I can see why people have you travel all over the country and speak. Steve Harvey's pretty good too, wasn't he?
Well, neat to sit there with a professional comedian and watch him work the room. And I mean, n- and Director Smith, I mean, like the guy had a different message for the staff than he had for the inmates, and he had them all there for an hour. And it's one of the original kings of comedy.
Yeah.
I learned a lot that day about communication.
And I tell you, just his candidness, straightforward, it was great, and it was an impactful day. There was a time before all of this that you were not speaking with teams and celebrities and those things. And you've developed a story. They say there's no testimony without a test. And so why, who is Damon before the soul of this world, all this life?
Good question. So the reason why Brian Collier, the former director of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, got in touch with you about me is because I know Brian Collier back from whenever I was an inmate in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. My inmate number is 1585689. In fact, I learned the story of the coffee bean in 2009 after a jury in Dallas had just sentenced me to life in prison, 65 years. In Texas, 65 years was life. I got sentenced to life in prison for engaged in organized criminal activity, a RICO case. I was the ringleader of a bunch of other meth addicts breaking into houses all over Dallas. And, my background was, I came from a great family in Texas, a Division I college quarterback, had the best jobs, worked here in the United States Congress in Washington, worked on Wall Street. And then when I was a broker in 2004 in Dallas, another broker introduced me to methamphetamines. And with 18 months, I was living on the streets of Dallas. I was homeless and I was committing crimes all over Dallas to feed my meth habit. And then I put together this crew of other meth addicts and we were breaking into houses. And this is a big deal because when I broke into people's houses, I didn't just steal their property. I stole my victim's sense of security. And I can't get that back. There's nothing I can do to fix the damage I did with that. But, angels were sent to me in 2008 to pull me out of that world. The angels would be the Dallas SWAT team. And they didn't just arrest me that day on July 30, 2008. They rescued me that day. So they arrest me in 2008. I go to trial in 2009. The trial lasts 6 days. The jury's gone for 10 minutes of deliberation. Like, I knew I was in trouble with a 10-minute deliberation, but I didn't know how much. The judge read out my sentence, life in prison. So in the time before I went to prison from county jail, this old inmate named Muhammad shared with me the story of the coffee fee. He told me prison was going to be like a pot of boiling water. And he told me the three choices to be like a carrot, an egg, or a coffee. And I remember hearing that message the first time, and I thought to myself, man, this put some power back in me. And I was so scared about the world I was going into, a Texas level 5 prison. But the coffee bean let me know that there was still a choice I had. I have choice every single day of how I was going to see that world, right? I could let it beat me down. I could let it make me hard, or I could change the world around me. And that's what I did, John. I went to prison. I got to work on myself. And I started first transforming myself every day, spiritually, mentally, physically. I learned a lot from the volunteers that used to come in prison. Volunteers are so big inside the prison. I think that's one of the biggest things we have, that we have these people from the communities around the prisons that want to come in, and volunteers have different backgrounds. Some of their backgrounds are kind of shady, like my background is. They've got some stuff in their past, but that's why they're such a good messenger. That's why they're so devoted to serving inside of a prison. And it was one of these chapel volunteers that told me about servant leadership. And I was telling him I was struggling with trying to change this prison to a positive place, trying to make coffee, trying to make these people change from being negative carrots and eggs to being coffee beans. He said, try servant leadership. He said, servant leadership is helping other people reach their goals of life, helping to raise other people to a different station of life. He said, when we help other people grow, we grow. That was it. I went back into my pod. I figured out what my gift was. And I think everybody in life has to figure out what their gift is in life. When you find your gift, you find your purpose, you start living your purpose. My gift was that I had an education. I had a bachelor's degree when I went to prison. Most of the guys in prison, education stopped somewhere in junior high, maybe early high school. So I opened a free tutoring service in prison. I started teaching guys how to read and write. I got them ready for the GED test. So if they ever got out of prison, they'd be a better husband, better father. And in turn, those guys learned how to serve by my service example, and they started to serve at each other. And the parole board took notice of this. And 7 years into this sentence in 2015, the parole board in Texas visits me, and they let me go. They let me go after 7 years on a 65-year sentence. Now, When I walk out of prison in 2015, I'm not a free man because I've got to carry the rest of that time to balance on parole. So I'm on parole in Texas until the year 2073. So I got a little more time of adult parole, but it's the whole idea about being a coffee. Now I've got to take my life outside prison and being an ex-con, man. It's tough, man, because there's a lot of ex-cons that have come before me that are burned to bridge the ground. It's tough adjusting back out. You understand this too as a former incarcerated person. But I got out there and I started serving other people out there. I started going around speaking in my local community, thinking I could just make a small change in the community where I lived in. And I was introduced to Dabo one night. We met one night. Dabo was the guy that brought me in to speak. And then obviously the world became a pot of boiling water in 2020 with COVID, and the book, The Coffee Bean, had already come out. And that's when my life kind of took off in this world where people needed the inspiration. People needed a message of hope. And that's what my voice became around the country. And, since then, the warden you were talking about was David Paul. David Paul was the warden and prison in Kentucky, the FCI Lexington. He was the guy that brought me into the Federal Bureau of Prisons the one time I got to go, because as a guy that's on parole for the rest of his life, the DOJ doesn't want a bunch of people that are on paper inside their facilities. So I tried for the last 4 or 5 years, to get into federal prisons. I couldn't get in. But when I heard your name and we got introduced to each other through Brian Collier, I knew this was a sign. This was a big shift. And here's what I think. I think that the coffee bean message, it came from a prison and it belongs back in a prison, but it didn't just belong to the inmates. It belongs to the staff too.
Let's talk about that because I can. It's funny. Warden Paul is just retired, like within a day or two ago. I'm pretty sure as I was talking to him, he was just trying to get to know me, and I think he might have just brought you in. I don't know if it got approved. I don't know how all it went, right? Because you're right. A lot of times it is very difficult, very challenging for somebody who has a history or especially on paper to be able to get back in. It was him that mentioned you, Brian Collier that mentioned you. We've been working a lot to bring in leadership development things to our staff, right? To really invest in our staff. You're one of the few voices also like mine who is committed to working with staff. We work with inmates as well. We try to do those things. And so you having this recommendation that you did from the staff, I didn't hear it from inmates, hey, get this guy in. It was staff. What a lot of our viewers don't know is you actually donated a really big donation to this bureau here recently, an investment in training. And you sent a team out to MSTC, filmed it. It's going to be coming out to some of our leaders soon. We spent a couple of days with our wardens out there. So tell me, why do you care? I mean, you're this former inmate. I mean, I'm sure you've, just like me, you've got stories of bad staff, right? But why do you care? Why do you make the investment in staff the way that you do across the country?
Yeah, great question. And here's the answer to it is Damon West, the guy you see in front of you today, right now, watching this video, the guy that goes all over the world sharing this message, has an incredible life where I have this impact, a philanthropist, a professor, a husband, a stepfather, a sober guy. Damon West didn't get turned us out. Damon West got here because whenever he was in prison, there were COs that made sure I could get to the chapel programs I needed to transform myself and become a better man. Because I believe that really rehabilitation is possible and it can be real. The inmate has to do the work. But, most guys I did time with, and I'm sure the same way with you, most people just want to do their time and be safe. That required a lot of COs that were dedicated to the mission of corrections to making sure I was safe, So that was there. When I needed to see a counselor, I needed to go to medical, or I needed, anything I needed inside that prison, there were always people on the staff there that made sure I got what I needed. And without that, I'm not the man. I'm not sitting here today because I can have all this idea about being at the coffee bean, but if there's not dedicated staff to make sure all that happens, none of this, what you see in front of you today, is happening. So one of the things I like to do when I go in and talk to staff, and I've never been able to do BOP until now. I've done other states, but first thing I do is I thank them because I can't go out and find the old staff that watched over me and worked in the prison where I was, but I could thank them and I can show them the example of someone that got it right. The rehabilitation did work because it lets them know their job is important, because their job is important. I believe prison is a triangle, Deputy Richard Smith. The triangle is this. You have staff over here on one point of the triangle, you have the inmates at another point of the triangle, and over here you have the family members. And I'm not just talking about family of inmates, but about family of staff. These staff that work in these prisons, man, you know this from doing time, man. They're in there almost as long as we are. They come home and they get to sleep in the free world, but they come back in this world, and that world is tough, man. The world inside of corrections. And I believe that the tools I use to transform myself, and I talk about for all these corporations and sports teams, these people that pay a lot of money to bring me in to teach the morals and principles of being a coffee bean, I believe that's something that the staff can use too. I know it's something the staff can use spiritually, mentally, physically, how they can work on themselves every single day, how they can not let this job that they have that's so important take home to their families. One of the things I saw when we did that training, that leadership training, and it blew my mind was when Dr. Gable asked the room, how many people in this room have been through a divorce? Almost every hand went up. How many people in this room know somebody that has taken their own life in the corrections? Almost the whole room, maybe the whole room raised their hands to those questions. It was the question he asked the room where he said, or not the question, but the statement he made. He said, we do all this training, all this time in corrections to prepare ourselves for if another inmate assaults us or kills us. When in reality is the person that looks back in the mirror is more likely to kill us than another inmate. And I'm like, whoa, that was earth shattering. Why? Yeah, because that's slide for mamba. Yeah, because, corrections doesn't get the attention that other law enforcement jobs get. Let's be honest, man. When something happens to a law enforcement officer out there in the world, a police officer, it makes the news. But when something happens to the correctional officer, it doesn't make the news. But my passion is in the world of corrections. And I am in a position right now in life that God has put me in, that I have the resources available to me to go around and speak as much as the BOP will let me speak. I travel the country all month long. I'm on the road 20, 25 days of every month, speaking somewhere in America. And now that BOP, now that you and Director Marshall have opened up the gates for me, I get to couple my trips and go into BOP facilities and share this message of resilience, of wellness with the staff, with the inmates too. Because the truth is if I can get the inmates on board with a presentation of them, and I can get them to change the way I can't change somebody. Let's be honest about that. Nobody can change another person, but if I can get you to think a different way, you can change yourself. And that's what I want to do when I go inside these facilities. First, I'm there primarily to focus on the staff, because I don't think the staff has ever forgotten something like this that's come through. This guy that goes around and speaking for a living and writes these books. I'm there to speak. I'm there to give away books. I'm there to give away hope and hopefully resilience and a wellness mindset. But I also want to go in there and talk to the inmates and tell them my story, because everybody needs hope. You know this from doing time. Hope is the big thing. If you don't have hope, negativity, evil, and darkness still is the void of hope. And so that's what I think my purpose is right now.
Yeah. So, I got to hear you talk in front of the inmates, staff, which was great. I've done a lot of speaking around inmates and traveled the country, the world. And, you have a really effective message. Why is it, we talked about staff, but what impact have you seen be made in inmates? I mean, now we're just coming into a season where it's okay for people like yourself, for myself, to be able to get back into prisons, to be able to do these things, to have this impact, have these conversations. What impact have you seen as you've traveled the country speaking at prisons with the inmates, them being able to hear your story?
The inmates, that's primarily what I've been able to do in state prisons around the country whenever I get to go in. First thing I see from the inmates is a belief. They have a belief that they can do something different with their life, because it's almost like touching the dream. I believe every human being has to be able to touch their dream. And if I can get into these facilities, they can touch the dream. I am the dream. You are the dream for someone that's been incarcerated. Let's be honest with you. I mean, President Trump giving you this opportunity in life elevated you to a place that, as ex-con, even with the life I have, I never dreamed it would be possible that the number 2 person in the BOP would be someone that has done time before. Anything is possible. And that's what I think the message is that these inmates get when they see Damon West. Frequently they'll say stuff to me like, hey man, I don't speak as well as you. I don't have the same support you have. My mom and my dad, they're not behind me like your parents were. I didn't have 2 parents. I didn't have money. But my message then was all the same, like, be where you are right now, make the change in here. And one of the things that they understand is it empowers them. Like, everybody wants to talk about building your brand, and everybody wants to feel like they have a purpose in life. And I tell these inmates, man, you're a brand. Work on building your brand right now, and be honest. Like, if what who you are right now is not something you would like follow as a brand, then work on it right now. Build that brand. Build the person you want to be. I believe the successful reentry begins the day you get to prison, and if it doesn't happen the first day, then let it start today. And that's one of the main messages, and it gives them hope. And I think that's the thing that everybody needs. And these inmates that hear the story, the coffee bean really resonates with them, and they know that it came from inside of institution. But the main thing is, and you know this from whenever you've ever talked to any inmate, man, they see if you could do it, I could do it.
Yeah. No, it's a big, I would tell you one of the things that I appreciate about President Trump and Attorney General Bondi is, for one, being tough on crime. Yeah. It surprises some people when I hear them say it. They ask me if I'm pro inmate or, pro staff, pro. I tell you what I'm pro more than anything is my family. 100% pro. I'm pro my neighborhood, the family, where my kids, where my grandkids live. That's what I'm pro before I am anything. And so public safety is important to me. I was one that violated that public safety years ago as a young man and deserved to be removed from the society and set away. What I also like about the president and AG Bondi is they also understand the intentionality it takes because people aren't doing life in prison. Some have lost their right to ever live among society, sure, but others haven't. And, it's that intentionality that we have to be able to return people back to our communities better than we receive them. It's why I think that corrections is the most noble profession in all of our government. I think it's the most important role in public safety. I say it all the time. I really believe it. It's why I like to invest in staff. It's why, the mission of corrections, I believe, is the most noble mission in all of our government. It's a big deal. And so, your message, and as you've challenged some of these inmates, many people say that, man, there's never change. One of the things I get a lot is they'll go, well, Josh, you're the few that can change. You were probably a pretty good guy, ahead time and all of this. What have you found to be the case? You've spent time at the highest levels. Now you've traveled around to the highest levels. Texas lets you come in everywhere. They want you speaking at all the different prisons. What do you say when they say, man, most of these will never change?
Yeah, the first thing I would say is like, I throw out a number to them, and it's a number I learned whenever I was getting my master's in criminal justice. And I went back and got the master's degree because I wanted people to take me more serious than a guy that just gotten out of prison. I knew I had a lot to offer, but how do I get this message out there? And it's like, okay, I had a bachelor's degree already, so I went and got the master's. And one of the things I learned in there, it was an eye-opening statistic. The number was 95%. That number represents the number of people that get out of prison. 95% of all the people incarcerated in America and all the state prisons and all the federal prisons are going to get out. They're going to get out, and they're going to be walking on your street one day. They're going to be pumping gas next to you. They're going to be in the line of Walmart next to your family. You talk about your family, your neighborhood, and safety and tough. I'm the same way. I can't imagine someone doing to me what I did to all my victims when I broke the social contract and I broke into people's home. Like, I can't imagine if someone did that in my home with my family. It would be devastating. And I know that 95% of these people are going to get out one day. I'm with you. It's the most noble profession there is to work in corrections. And let's be honest, man, corrections, it's such a big deal because if 95% of these people are getting out, we want them to have the best opportunity for them to change themselves while they're in there. And that requires all of us. This is an all of us problem. Corrections is, I don't even think corrections is part of the criminal justice system. I think the criminal justice system, you want to really get down to it, criminal justice system is the criminal in the street, the criminal in the courtroom, it's the judges, it's the DAs, it's the law enforcement on the streets, it's the legislators that write the laws. That's the criminal justice system. Corrections, we get people after they've been dealt with by the criminal justice system. And corrections is its own system. And I wish America, and that's one of the things I want to do in life, is to bring more attention to it. And I've got this platform now that I've grown and been given, that I want to bring more attention to corrections because I believe it's a system worthy of people's attention and resources. More resources need to be added to corrections. And I think that once we start breaking this thing away from the criminal justice system and show people, hey, look, we're a very important cog in the wheel of American society. And if we don't have a healthy staff in these prisons, we're not going to have a healthy society, because 95% of people getting out. That's the number I focus on. And that's the number I tell people.
You know, there was obviously me getting this job. You know, there's all kinds of mixed feelings, right? For our first week in the role, you know, you had all social media, and it had been rumored for quite a while.
Can I say something real quick about what you said in Atlanta that I thought was so good? When you talked to the staff that day, and you always make it a point, like, hey, Damon, whenever you go in these prisons, let's talk to the staff first. They don't ever get this kind of stuff, right? So I'm following your lead on that. Great lead, too. But you said something to the staff, you know, and you're like, hey, look, everybody knows I've been to prison before. We understand the backstory. And you told me something like, I hear the chatter that people think I'm just here for the inmates. You said, let's assume that I'm really just here to make the inmates' lives better. Let's just say that was even true, which is not. If I'm just here to make the inmates' lives better, that would make your life better too, because the inmates would be happier, and you have less staff problems, staff assaults. You know, it's less contraband coming in.
Well, what I tell them is, even if that was the ultimate thing, I know that it won't be successful unless we invest in our staff.
Exactly.
I mean, it doesn't have to.
But it was great, man, because you got the room like buying in. I saw the heads nodding, people's body language. You know how to read body language well. I know how to read it well. Anybody in staff knows how to read body language, and their body language relaxed.
Yeah. Well, there was a staff member that came up to me. I think he worked in IT, and you know, you had all kinds of chatter buzzing around when I first got here. It's still a little bit now, but he said, hey, boss, I just want to tell you, forget what all these other people are saying. He said, I've been here 23 years. He said, I take pride in you being able to be here, because I feel like I helped make that happen. Boom. As a staff member at BOP, I feel like I got to make that happen. So while you have some other voices, everybody feels different ways. It's been interesting and exciting to talk to the staff that say they take pride in being able to see somebody. It's really a full circle moment. And if the prisons are doing their job, that's what we're creating, right? We're creating more Damon Wests and those things. And so I want to wrap, and I want to say thank you for the investment that you've been willing to make into the BOP.
Thank you, man. I mean, you opened up a door that I didn't even think would ever be open. But I mean, anything is possible. But thank you for this opportunity. I get to travel the country and and spread this message throughout all the BOP facilities with the staff, with the inmates. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. But I'll tell you, you made the investment. You showed up. You've invested in our staff in a big way. I mean, Steve Harvey came in, got to see our staff. You just invested in our wardens, all the new wardens. People can call them and ask them. You know, you were out there and invested quite a lot of time. You've already made some other donations to the Bureau of Prisons. We've got outside stakeholders now that have already committed a lot of money for the first time ever into the BOP. And so I think it's a new time. But again, thanks for your heart as you go around. Thanks for your investment into our staff, especially. Thanks for the investment into the inmate population. And I'm just really excited that we've been able to get connected through this. I'm so glad Director Collier and even our Warden Paul suggested you. So I'm looking for some exciting days to hearing our staff get to hear you as you travel around the country. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And I'm very grateful. And it's like the first conversation you have when you said, Damon, I really love your message and I really think it could help, but I don't have any money for you. And I said, man, you remember I told you, you can't pay me for what I want to do in the BOP, man, because that's a different way to get paid on the spiritual level. And I practice what I preach, Deputy Director Smith. I really think that servant leadership is the secret to life. And this is my way to help other people reach their goals in life, help to raise, the staff and corrections up to a different level in life. Because again, when we help other people grow, we grow. So thanks for the opportunity.
Hey, thank you. Appreciate you. Thank you.